If you had the opportunity to go back in time and to change some of your mistakes, would you? Are you sure about that? I love stories. I know that's hard for some of you to believe. Not really. I do. I love stories. And not just telling them, I love hearing them. I love getting people's stories because we all have one. We're all living one right now. And I think it's a fantastic thing to be able to sit down and hear somebody's story because you get to know so much about them, where they're going, where they've been, what they've been through, all these wonderful things. Stories are just an amazing thing. Made me think though, a little while ago when I was still over at my other office, I had a youth come in, a former youth come in and sit down and talk with me. Now, she was going through a bit of a hard time and she just needed somebody to talk to. So she sat down and she started recounting some of the events that had led her up to the point of sitting in my office. And there were a lot of good points, there were a lot of bad points. But at one point, how many times can I say point? She said, I wish all those bad things didn't happen to me. My response was, no, I don't think you do. I'll come back to that in a minute. Now, I've never been much of a reader, never been my thing. I find it difficult to sit down with a book and just dive into it and get going because most of the time it doesn't keep my attention. And if you don't have my attention, not going to listen or read. But when I was a kid, oddly enough, I did read a lot. But I read one type of book more prominently than any other type of book. And it was a choose your own adventure book. Now, some of you that makes sense and you've probably read or heard of these things before anyway, but these books were fantastic. You got to read a story up to a point in the book and then it would give you a choice. Either take the path A and turn to page 68 or take the path B and turn to page 32. And it had you jumping all over the books, making decisions, and the outcome of the book would always be different compared or depending on what your decisions were. Now, I had one particular ones that I liked, and it was called Wizards, Warriors, and You. So you got to either pick, you were going to be a wizard, you're going to be a warrior, and then you had to pick all the different swords or weapons you were going to use, or if you were the wizard, which spells you were going to use. But those are the only ones you could use throughout the book. And every time you made a decision in the book, if you had the right sword or weapon or spell, then things would go your way. But if you didn't, you could be in a lot of trouble. Well, the thing is about those books is when you come to a decision, you could, not saying I ever did this, but you could flip ahead to see what the ramifications of each decision was going to be. And then decide, because sometimes if you chose the wrong path in the book, you died and you had to start the book all over again. So you skip ahead a little bit, you find out, am I going to die or is this the right one? And then you choose the right path to keep moving on. If only life was like that, right? What would that be like? If we were able to actually change our decisions in the past or go ahead in the future and see and always pick the proper path or the one that was going to be most beneficial to us, what would that be like? How much pain would we avoid? How different would our lives be? There'd be no conflict or less conflict, fewer problems, but I don't think there'd be any growth. My parents, when they moved out to the house that I grew up in out in the country, just outside of a little town called Thorndale, when they moved there, they were surprised to find in the spring that there were many different types of trees on that yard. There were apple trees, there was a cherry tree or two, there was a plum tree, and there was a pear tree. Now, not all of these trees survived the entire time that we were there. The plum tree, I think, got cut down because it was infested with bees all the time. A cherry tree got struck by lightning, and the other one was had to get cut down because it had a disease in it. A couple of apple trees actually happened to survive, but the part I want to talk to you about is the pear tree. Now, the pear tree wasn't a very big tree when we moved in, but as we lived on there and it grew bigger, we were expecting pears, but nothing ever happened. Every spring, it would be full of leaves and it looked like it'd have a lot of blossoms on it, but no pears. Nothing ever came from it. And then my dad realized that we were doing something wrong. He went out the next spring, and when a pear tree or a fruit tree grows in the springtime, it does a whole bunch of these shoots, new growth, and it, as any tree, tries to get bigger and bigger. Well, what my dad did was he went out and he trimmed off every one of those new growths. And now you think that's counterproductive. I mean, you're killing the tree. Why? Well, it turns out that because he trimmed that tree back, and I'm sure the tree did not want to be trimmed back, that it was actually able to make pears that year because all the energy that it used in making new branches and leaves wasn't being put into producing fruit. Now that it had been trimmed back, the tree switched gears and put all of its energy into making fruit. And I got to tell you, the first year we had about maybe 10 pears. So we were kind of wondering if that was actually working. The next summer, after Dad had done that, the tree was so thick with pears that the branches were actually that close to the ground. They just bending down. There were so many pears on there. Why? Because it had to be pruned. It had to go through a little bit of discomfort and some pain possibly, but the outcome was much, much better. I want to read you a Bible verse now. It's from John 15, verse 2. That says, "Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. But every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it might bear more fruit." So let's go back to that answer that I gave my youth. I want to go back and make sure that all those bad things didn't happen. I don't think you do. Why? Because every time something like that happens, it's almost like we're getting pruned and ready to make more fruit. We're getting trimmed and turning into the people that we are today. If you went back and corrected all of your mistakes, and were able to change them into different things, you would not be who you are today. And is that a good thing? I have to say no. I know there's plenty of things in my life that the amount of pain that I've had, I would love to take away, but I can tell you this, if I had taken those things away, I would not be able to do what it is that I do now, because I wouldn't have parts of my story that would match up with parts of your story and be able to sit there and talk with you. Remember how I said I love stories? Well, that's the other part of it that I love. See, by hearing your story, I get to get a sense of who you are, and I get to share part of my story. And when we do that, we find that sections overlap. And that's how we build trust. If I didn't have all those parts of my story, I wouldn't be able to do that. And the most important part of my story is where God comes in. Because it's God's story that I listen to, it's God's story that I like to follow, and it's because of God's story I'm able to do what I do as well. I trust Him implicitly, I trust Him entirely, and I trust Him with everything that I have, even when things aren't going the way that I want them to. I know that I can trust Him, and He's never let me down. Would I go back and change some of the stuff? No. Why? But because of some of that stuff I had to go through, because of some of the bad things in my story, I had to rely on God more. I had to put my trust in Him more. I remember there were very many days when I had nothing left, and all I had was God, and I had to rely on Him. And in those days, He blessed me in a massive way. I guess that's what I wanted to bring to you guys today. You all have stories. There's your story, and there's God's story, and I hope that they match up. And if they don't, maybe it's time to start listening to what God has to say as well. I hope you guys like these videos, and if you do, please hit the subscribe button down below and hit the like button and maybe hit that little bell, because it really does help me know who is watching and if people are interested in these things. And if you have any comments, please put them down below, because I love getting comments. Why? Because it's another part of the story. All right. God bless y'all. We'll talk to you again later.